The Casablanca air in July of 1987 was a thick, syrupy thing, heavy with the scent of diesel from the petty taxis, roasting corn from street vendors, and the faint, salty promise of the nearby Atlantic. Inside the cool, tiled walls of their home in the Habas Quarter, 7-year-old Layla felt a different kind of chill. It had nothing to do with the sea breeze that snaked through the courtyard's arches. This was a deep, localized cold, one that lived in the back of the pantry. Her mother, Fatima, was humming a Farah's song, her hands rhythmically kneading dough on the marble countertop. The scent of orange blossom water and yeast filled the kitchen, a warm, comforting cloud that Layla usually loved. But today, it couldn't compete with the magnetic pull of the small, dark room off the kitchen. "Mama," Layla said, her small voice barely a whisper. She stood at the pantry door, her bare feet pressing against the cold Zellige tiles. "Yes, Habibti," Fatima answered without looking up, her focus on the silky dough. "Are you hungry again? The cobs will be ready soon." "No, it's the wall, it's cold again." Fatima sighed, a gentle puff of air that dusted a little flour from her lips. It was the third time this week. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked over, crouching down to Layla's level. She placed a warm, flour-dusted hand on the back wall of the pantry, a solid, plaster-covered surface that separated their kitchen from the neighbor's property. "Layla, my sweet girl, it's an old house. The walls are thick stone, they are always cool, it's why we are comfortable in the summer." "No, not this one," Layla insisted, her brow furrowed with the intense seriousness only a child can muster. She pointed to a specific spot near the floor. "It's different, it hums." Fatima pressed her ear to the wall, playing along. She heard nothing but the muffled sounds of their own home, the gurgle of pipes, the distant chatter from the street. "I don't hear anything, my love. It's just the old house settling, maybe the water pipes." She kissed Layla's forehead. "You have an imagination as big as the Sahara. Now, go play, I need to finish the bread." But Layla couldn't play. The feeling wouldn't leave her. It wasn't a scary feeling, not like the monsters she imagined under her bed. It was a feeling of presence, a quiet, waiting space. She would sit just outside the pantry, drawing in her notebook with a set of waxy crayons, her back to the kitchen, facing the source of her curiosity. She imagined what was behind the plaster. Her mother said it was the neighbor's house, but it didn't feel like it. It felt empty. It felt deep. That afternoon, while the house was quiet and her mother was napping through the hottest part of the day, Layla made a decision. Words weren't working. Fatima couldn't feel the cold or hear the hum, so she would show her. She found a large, clean sheet of paper, the kind her father used for his architectural sketches. She spread it on the floor of the courtyard, the dappled sunlight warming her back. With a black crayon gripped tightly in her fist, she began to draw. She didn't draw the wall itself. She drew what was behind it. First, she drew a narrow staircase, steep and made of uneven stones, spiraling down into darkness. She pressed hard with the crayon, making the steps look solid and ancient. At the bottom of the stairs, she drew a small, rectangular room. The floor was dirt, which she colored a muddy brown, leaving little patches of white to show dampness. The walls were the same rough stone as the stairs. She paused, closing her eyes, trying to remember the details that bloomed in her mind whenever she stood by the pantry wall. There was no window. The only light came from a single, bare bulb hanging from a wire, which she drew as a yellow circle with shaky lines radiating from it. Beneath the light, she drew 2 large wooden barrels, their staves held together by dark metal bands. Next to them was a pile of what looked like old sacks, lumpy and gray. Then came the most important detail. On the far wall, opposite the stairs, she drew a mark. It was a strange symbol, a circle with a jagged line running through it like a crack of lightning. She'd never seen it anywhere before, but in her mind it was there, etched into the stone, dark and permanent. When she was finished, she looked at the drawing. It felt right. It felt real. This was the cold place. This was the source of the hum. She waited until her mother woke, refreshed and smiling, ready for the evening ritual of preparing mint tea. Layla walked up to her, holding the drawing with both hands. "Mama, I drew the cold room." Fatima took the paper, her smile widening. "Oh, Layla, what is this?" She studied the drawing, her eyes taking in the details. The steep stairs, the dark room, the barrels. "My goodness, what an imagination. Is this from one of your storybooks?" "No," Layla said firmly. "It's in the wall." Fatima chuckled, ruffling her daughter's dark hair. "It's a wonderful drawing, Habibti. So many details. You have your father's eye." She saw the earnest, almost desperate look on Layla's face and softened her tone. "It's a very creative story, my love, but it's just a story." She folded the paper carefully, creasing it with her thumb. "I'm going to keep this. When you're a famous artist one day, we will look back at your first masterpiece." Fatima walked to the large wooden chest in the salon, the one where she kept important documents, wedding photos, and other family treasures. She opened the lid, releasing the scent of cedarwood and old paper, and tucked Layla's drawing inside a large envelope filled with her childhood report cards. Layla watched her, a knot of frustration and resignation in her small chest. Her mother didn't believe her. She hadn't understood. As Fatima closed the chest, the drawing of the dark, hidden room was sealed away, destined to become just another forgotten piece of a child's vivid but fleeting imagination. 36 years felt both like an eternity and the blink of an eye. The flight from Montreal to Casablanca was a familiar cocoon of recycled air and muted engine hum. A stark contrast to the explosion of life that greeted Layla the moment she stepped out of Mohammed V International Airport. The air, thick with the scent of dust, diesel, and the distant sea, was the same. The chorus of insistent taxi drivers, the chaotic dance of luggage carts, the sheer, unapologetic vibrancy of it all. It was the unchanging soul of the city she had left behind. Layla, now an architect in her early 40s, carried herself with a quiet confidence that her 7-year-old self would never have recognized. Her life in Canada was ordered, precise, built on blueprints and structural calculations. Yet, every return trip to Morocco felt like peeling back layers of that carefully constructed identity to find the girl who once felt the cold breath of a stone wall on her skin. Her mother, Fatima, was the reason for this visit. A recent phone call, filled with more sighs than words, had conveyed the truth more effectively than any direct statement. The house was beginning to fail her. A persistent leak in the kitchen had blossomed into a full-blown moisture problem, and the plumbing, a relic of a bygone era, was groaning in protest. "It's time, Habibti," Fatima had said, her voice thin but resolute. "This old house needs more than my tired hands can offer." The taxi navigated the bustling streets, a river of vintage Peugeots, modern sedans, and buzzing mopeds. Layla watched the familiar landmarks blur past. The Grand Hassan II Mosque touching the Atlantic sky, the Art Deco buildings of the city center, the slow transition into the quieter, residential neighborhood of her youth. When the taxi pulled up to the familiar whitewashed house with its sky blue trim, a wave of profound nostalgia washed over her. The bougainvillea still spilled over the garden wall, a riot of defiant magenta. The iron gate squeaked with the same melancholic tune it always had. Fatima was waiting at the door, her frame smaller, more delicate than Layla remembered, but her smile was as expansive as ever. They embraced in a long, silent hug that smelled of orange blossom water and home. "You are thin," Fatima declared, holding her daughter at arm's length, a classic Moroccan mother's critique that was really a declaration of love. "And you are as beautiful as ever, Mama," Layla replied, kissing her on both cheeks. The next few days were a gentle rhythm of mint tea, shared meals, and long conversations. They talked about Layla's work, Fatima's neighbors, the price of argan oil at the souk, everything and nothing. But beneath the pleasantries lay the real purpose of the visit. On the third morning, Layla led her mother into the kitchen. The scent of dampness was undeniable, a musty undertone to the spices on the rack. "We have to deal with this, Mama," Layla said, her professional tone softening with affection. She ran her hand along the wall, separating the kitchen from the small, narrow pantry. "The plaster is crumbling. I'm willing to bet the old pipes behind it have finally given up." Fatima sighed, tracing a crack in the tile with the toe of her slipper. That pantry, it has always been a cold spot in the house. Layla froze for a half second, her hand hovering over the wall. An echo of a memory, distant and faint, surfaced. A child's certainty, an inexplicable chill. She shook it off, attributing it to the power of suggestion. It's the moisture, it's drawing the heat out. The best solution, honestly, is to take this wall down. It's not load-bearing. We can open up the space, create a modern, brighter kitchen for you. We'll replace all the plumbing while we're at it. Fatima looked at the wall, a thoughtful, faraway expression on her face. That wall. You were always so obsessed with it as a little girl. Layla laughed, a genuine, surprised sound. I barely remember. Oh, you were, Fatima insisted, her eyes twinkling. You used to press your ear against it and tell me you could hear humming. You were convinced there was a secret room back there. She paused, a smile playing on her lips. You even drew me a map of it. A very detailed, very serious little drawing of a basement with stairs and barrels. I was so impressed with your imagination. The memory hit Layla then, not as a faint echo, but as a vivid flash. The waxy feel of the crayons in her hand, the rough texture of the paper, the urgent need to make her mother see. The staircase spiraling into darkness, the strange symbol on the far wall. It felt so real even now. I remember that, she said slowly, her voice barely a whisper. The drawing. I saved it, you know, Fatima said, her tone casual as she turned to put the kettle on. It's in that old wooden box with your first shoes and your school reports. A mother keeps these things. Layla felt a strange shiver, one that had nothing to do with the dampness in the room. She was an architect. She dealt in facts, in materials, in the physics of stress and support. A hidden basement in a Casablanca townhouse built on a solid slab foundation? It was nonsensical. A child's fantasy, nothing more. Still, the thought lingered. They agreed on the renovation. Layla, with her expertise, drew up a simple but effective plan. She called a local contractor, Hamid, a man with a graying mustache and hands as sturdy as the concrete he worked with, recommended by a cousin. He came the next day, assessed the situation with a series of grunts and sharp nods, and confirmed Layla's diagnosis. Yes, mademoiselle, the pipe is finished, he declared, tapping the wall with his knuckles. Taking down this wall is the smartest move. It is thin, just plaster and old brick. No support, easy job. We can start Monday. That evening, as dusk settled over the city and the call to prayer echoed from a nearby minaret, Layla found herself standing alone in the pantry. She placed her palm flat against the wall. It was cool to the touch, but she knew it was just old stone and damp plaster. There was no hum, no spectral cold. There was only the weight of 36 years of reason, logic, and a life built far away from childhood whimsy. And yet, as she stood there in the encroaching darkness, she couldn't shake the image from her mind. A detailed drawing, tucked away in a box of memories, waiting like a forgotten blueprint for a truth she had long since dismissed as fantasy. The morning of the demolition arrived with a palpable sense of finality. The Casablanca air, usually thick with the scent of salt from the nearby Atlantic and spices from the market, was now tinged with the sharp smell of brewed coffee and the dry, earthy scent of old plaster. Hamid, the contractor, arrived precisely at 8, his team of 2 workers in tow. They were efficient and professional, their voices a low murmur as they unloaded tools from their truck, sledgehammers, crowbars, and heavy-duty drills that seemed jarringly out of place in the cozy kitchen where Fatima had cooked for nearly 4 decades. Fatima moved about the space with a quiet, restless energy, her hands fluttering over countertops as if saying goodbye. "Are you sure about this, Layla?" she asked, her voice soft. "It feels so drastic. This wall has been here longer than you have." Layla placed a reassuring hand on her mother's shoulder. "It's the only way to fix the damp, Mama, and you'll love the open space. More light, better flow. It will be beautiful, I promise." As an architect, she saw the potential, the clean lines, the future. But a part of her, a smaller, 7-year-old part, felt a strange thrum of anticipation that had nothing to do with design aesthetics. "Before they start," Fatima said suddenly, her eyes lighting up with a thought, "there's something I want to find." She disappeared into her bedroom, the one that overlooked the small garden, and returned a few moments later carrying a worn, wooden box inlaid with mother of pearl. It was Layla's memory box, the one Fatima had kept safe all these years. She placed it on the dining table, away from the impending dust cloud. The hinges creaked as she opened the lid. Inside, nestled amongst faded photographs, a lock of baby hair, and a silver bracelet Layla had lost when she was 10, was a folded piece of yellowed paper. It was the drawing. Fatima carefully unfolded it. The crayon lines were still surprisingly vibrant. The crudely drawn stone staircase, the round barrels, the uneven walls, and at the bottom, the strange, swirling symbol. They both stared at it, a relic from a past that felt both distant and incredibly close. "I remember this day so clearly," Fatima whispered, a smile touching her lips. "You were so certain, my little Layla, your secret room. You spent the entire afternoon trying to convince me." Layla laughed, a genuine, warm sound. "I had a wild imagination." She took the drawing, her architect's eyes scanning the details. The perspective was all wrong, the lines shaky, yet there was an odd intentionality to it. The placement of the stairs, the shape of the room. "I wonder where I even got the idea. Maybe from a storybook?" "Whatever it was very you," Fatima said, her gaze fond. "Always seeing things others couldn't." Their nostalgic moment was interrupted by Hamid. Mademoiselle, are you ready for us to begin? We'll start by covering the furniture." They nodded, and Fatima carefully placed the drawing back in its box, closing the lid on the memory. The workers draped heavy canvas sheets over everything, transforming the familiar, warm kitchen into a sterile, protected zone. The air grew thick with anticipation. Layla and Fatima stood in the doorway to the living room, watching as the first sledgehammer swung. The impact was a dull, deafening thud that seemed to vibrate through the very foundation of the house. Plaster dust exploded into the air. A crack appeared, spiderwebbing across the faded floral wallpaper. Another swing, and a chunk of the wall fell away, revealing the lath and plaster skeleton beneath. For an hour, the rhythmic destruction continued. The men worked with a practiced, methodical force, breaking down the barrier piece by piece. Layla found herself holding her breath with each swing, an irrational tension coiling in her gut. She told herself it was just the noise, the dust, the controlled chaos of a renovation. But the feeling was deeper, an echo of the coldness she'd felt against her palm all those years ago. Beside her, Fatima clutched a small prayer bead necklace, her knuckles white. "Something's not right," one of the workers, a young man named Karim, said, pausing with his crowbar. He tapped a section of the exposed wooden lath. Instead of the expected solid thud, it produced a hollow, resonant echo. Hamid stopped his work and walked over. "What is it?" "Listen," Karim said, tapping again. Boom, boom, boom. The sound was deep wrong. It was the sound of empty space. Hamid's professional curiosity was piqued. He took a hammer and gave the spot a sharp, exploratory rap. A section of the wood splintered, and the plaster around it crumbled inward, disappearing into darkness. A hush fell over the room, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant city traffic. Dust motes danced in the single beam of sunlight cutting through the room. Hamid pulled a heavy-duty flashlight from his tool belt. "Stand back," he advised, his voice now serious. He aimed the powerful beam into the newly formed hole. Layla and Fatima leaned forward, their hearts pounding in unison. The light cut through decades of blackness, illuminating not pipes, not insulation, not the other side of the kitchen wall, but something impossible. It was the top of a stone step. Rough-hewn, covered in a thick blanket of dust, but unmistakably a step. And below it, the shadow of another, descending into an unseen depth. Layla's breath caught in her throat. Her mind raced, trying to reconcile the logical, architectural plans in her head with the impossible reality in front of her. Beside her, Fatima let out a small, sharp gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. Her eyes darted from the hole in the wall to the memory box on the dining table, where the crayon drawing of a stone staircase lay hidden, a silent, perfect prophecy of this very moment. The dust motes danced like frantic spirits in the powerful beam of Hamid's flashlight, a swirling galaxy in the sudden, profound darkness. The hole in the wall was a gaping mouth, exhaling a cool, ancient breath that smelled of damp earth and time itself. For a long moment, no one spoke. The rhythmic ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway seemed unnaturally loud, marking seconds that stretched into an eternity. The drawing in Layla's hand felt less like paper and more like a heavy stone tablet, its pencil lines etched with a truth she was now forced to confront. Fatima was the first to break the spell. A soft, trembling gasp escaped her lips, and she took a half step back, her hand flying to her mouth. Her eyes, wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief, darted from the dark opening to her daughter's face. "Layla," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "All this time, it was real, it was always real." The unspoken words hung in the air between them, "And I never believed you." Layla couldn't answer. A strange, cold certainty washed over her, silencing the logical architect in her mind who was screaming about subsidence and forgotten cellars. This felt different, deeper. This was the coldness she had felt as a child, the very same chill that had seeped through the plaster and into her small hand. Vindicated, yet terrified. The drawing wasn't imagination, it was a memory. But a memory of what? Hamid, ever the professional, recovered first. He cleared his throat, the sound grounding them back in the dusty reality of the kitchen. "Attendes," he said, his voice firm, though his eyes still held a spark of astonishment. "Wait, nobody moves." He stepped forward, peering cautiously into the void but keeping a safe distance. "We don't know how long this has been sealed. The air could be bad, no oxygen, or worse. The structure, these stairs, could be unstable." He turned to one of his workers. "Karim, bring the heavy-duty lantern and a crowbar. And rope." Hamid's practical concerns were a welcome anchor in the swirling sea of impossibility. He was treating this not as a supernatural event, but as a dangerous, unknown space, and that gave Layla a sliver of control. "What do you think it is?" she asked, her voice steadier than she expected. "An old cellar, probably," Hamid reasoned, shining his flashlight down again. The beam could only penetrate a few feet, illuminating stone steps slick with a fine layer of condensation, maybe from the original foundation, before the house was remodeled decades ago. People seal things up and forget, but they hadn't just forgotten. They had plastered over it, hidden it so completely that no one in Fatima's family knew it existed. "Why?" Karim returned with the equipment. Hamid inspected the top step, tapping it firmly with the crowbar. It gave a solid, reassuring thud. He tied one end of the rope around his waist, handing the other to his two workers. "Just in case," he said with a grim nod. He clicked on the powerful industrial lantern, flooding the stairwell with a harsh, white light that chased the deeper shadows away, revealing walls of rough-hewn stone. "I'm going with you," Layla stated, her resolve hardening. The fear was still there, a knot in her stomach, but it was being eclipsed by an overwhelming need to know. This was her mystery. It had waited for her for 36 years. Fatima looked at her, her face pale with anxiety. "Layla, no. Please, it's not safe. I'll be right behind Hamid, Mama. I have to." She placed the drawing on the kitchen counter, as if leaving a map for someone to follow, and grabbed a smaller flashlight for herself. There was no arguing with the look in her eyes. Hamid gave a resigned sigh but didn't protest. He understood. He began his descent, testing each step before putting his full weight on it. "Careful," he called back up. "It's slippery." The air grew colder and thicker with each step down. It was a heavy, stagnant atmosphere, carrying the scent of petrichor from moisture seeping through the stone, overlaid with the dry, papery smell of decay. The silence was absolute, broken only by the scrape of their shoes and their own shallow breaths. Layla kept one hand on the rough, cold wall, feeling the history of the place through her fingertips. It felt like descending into a tomb. They counted 12 steps before their feet touched a floor of hard-packed earth. The space opened into a small, square room, no larger than the pantry above it. The lantern's light swept across the chamber, revealing it to be stark and empty, save for one thing. Against the far wall, nestled in the shadows, sat 3 wooden barrels. They were just as she had drawn them. Squat and stout, made of dark, almost black wood, and bound by hoops of deeply rusted iron. They were coated in a thick blanket of dust and cobwebs, silent sentinels guarding a long-held secret. A choked sound escaped Layla's throat. She stepped forward, her own flashlight beam trembling as it joined Hamid's. The scene was surreal, a perfect reconstruction of a 7-year-old sketch. It was one thing to see the stairs, but this was irrefutable. Every detail was correct. Hamid let out a low whistle. "I'll be damned." Layla felt drawn to the middle barrel, the one that had always been the focus of her drawing. She moved closer, her heart pounding against her ribs. The air around it felt even colder. She reached out a hesitant hand, her fingers brushing against the dusty wood. Wiping away a patch of grime, her flashlight beam caught an etching in the wood. Her breath hitched. It was the symbol. A perfect crescent moon, tilted on its side, with 3 small, distinct dots carved just below its arc. It wasn't a child's fantasy. It was real, and it was right in front of her. The air in the cellar was a physical presence, thick with the dust of forgotten decades and the heavy silence of a sealed tomb. Layla's fingers remained pressed against the rough wood of the barrel, the carved crescent, and dots a terrifyingly familiar relief under her skin. The beam from Hamid's flashlight cut a stark white tunnel through the gloom, illuminating the swirling dust motes like a galaxy of tiny ghosts. He had taken a half-step back, his initial professional curiosity eclipsed by a profound sense of awe and trepidation. "It's identical," Layla whispered, her voice hoarse. She finally pulled her hand away, leaving a faint print in the dust next to the carving. Every curve, every dot. How is this possible? Hamid slowly swept the light across the other 2 barrels, then back to the stone walls. They were impeccably constructed, with no other markings, no signs of decay beyond the fine layer of grime. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice low and steady, a calming anchor in the surreal environment. "But we're here now. The question is, what do we do next?" The question hung in the air, as tangible as the dust. The primal, journalistic urge to know, to uncover, warred with a deep-seated fear of desecrating something that was never meant to be found. "We have to open them," Layla said, more to convince herself than him. Hamid aimed the flashlight at the lid of the central barrel. It was made of thick, dark wood, held in place by rusted iron bands. "Layla, we need to think about this. We have no idea what's inside. It could be old wine, preserved foods, or it could be unstable chemicals or something personal. This room was sealed for a reason. Whoever did this didn't want it found." His gaze was serious. "Are we sure we have the right to violate that?" His words struck a chord of doubt. He was right. This wasn't an archaeological dig, it was a family home. A secret kept by her own ancestors. Was this discovery or trespass? She looked at the barrels, then at the oppressive stone walls. "You're right," she conceded, her shoulders slumping slightly. "But I can't just walk away and seal it back up. That drawing, it's been a shadow in the back of my mind my entire life. I have to understand what it means." "Okay," Hamid said, nodding. "Okay, let's be smart about it. Before we touch those barrels again, let's check the rest of this room. Thoroughly. Maybe there's another clue. A loose stone, another carving, anything." Grateful for the practical approach, Layla agreed. For the next 20 minutes, they conducted a methodical search. Hamid ran his hands over the mortar lines, tapping the stone blocks, listening for any hollow sounds. Layla traced the perimeter, her eyes scanning for any inconsistency in the floor or walls. There was nothing. The room was a perfect, impenetrable vault. It was designed with one entrance, the one they had just come through, and it was built to stay closed. Whoever built this was a master stonemason, Hamid concluded, wiping dusty hands on his trousers. And they were meticulous. There's nothing else here. Defeated, Layla leaned against the cool stone wall, the weight of the mystery pressing down on her. It was a dead end. A room with no answers, only more questions. Upstairs, in the bright, modern kitchen that felt a world away, Fatima sat at the table, a forgotten cup of sweet mint tea in her hands. She stared at the new, gaping hole in her pantry, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She had heard Layla's shocked exclamation through the static of the walkie-talkie Hamid had given her. "The symbol is here, Mama. It's real." A crescent moon with 3 dots. The image swam in her mind, dredging up a feeling, a scent, the faint aroma of cedarwood and spice. She closed her eyes, letting the sensory ghost guide her back through time. She was a little girl, no older than Layla had been in 1987. She was in her grandfather's study, a room she was rarely allowed to enter. Her grandfather, Omar, was a stern, quiet man, a trader who dealt in spices and artisan goods from across Morocco. He was packing a wooden crate, and on the side he had burned a mark with a hot iron poker. A crescent moon and 3 small dots beneath it. "Baba," she had asked her own father later, "what is grandfather's mark?" Her father had smiled. "He says it is the moon that guides him, and the 3 greatest treasures he protects." She never learned what those treasures were. Omar had passed away not long after, a man known more for his business acumen than his sentimentality. The family had always assumed it was a merchant's brand, nothing more. Fatima's eyes shot open. It wasn't just a brand, it was a key. Scrambling from her chair, she rushed to the top of the dark staircase, her heart pounding with a new urgency. "Layla," she called out, her voice echoing in the confined space, amplified and distorted. "Layla, can you hear me?" Down below, Layla and Hamid flinched at the sudden sound. Layla grabbed their walkie-talkie. "Mama, what is it? Are you okay? The symbol?" Fatima's voice was breathless, strained with emotion. "It belonged to your great-grandfather, to Omar. He was a trader. He put that mark on his most valuable shipments. He said it represented his 3 greatest treasures." The silence that followed was different. It was no longer empty, but filled with a sudden, shocking clarity. The anonymous builder of this room now had a face, a name. Omar. Her great-grandfather. This wasn't a stranger's secret. This was a family legacy, a story hidden in the foundations of their own home. Layla looked from the staircase to the barrel, a new fire in her eyes. The fear was still there, but it was now overshadowed by an intense, personal need to know. This was her history, her right. She turned to Hamid, her expression one of unshakable resolve. "It's him. It's my family," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I have to know what he treasured so much that he buried it in stone." Hamid held her gaze for a long moment, then gave a slow, deliberate nod. The ethical debate was over. He walked back to the top of the stairs and retrieved a long crowbar from his toolbox. Returning to her side, he handed it to her, his grip firm. "Then let's find out." Layla took the cold, heavy steel. Together, they approached the central barrel. She wedged the tip of the crowbar into the thin seam between the lid and the barrel's edge. The sound of metal scraping against aged wood was unnervingly loud in the silent cellar, the first noise to disturb this space in generations. With a deep breath, she put her weight on the bar, and the real history of the house began to break open. The air in the small cellar was thick with the dust of decades, each particle a silent witness to the passage of time. Hamid positioned the tip of the crowbar into the seam of the central barrel's lid, his knuckles white. Layla stood beside him, her breath held captive in her chest. The memory of her mother's words echoed in the enclosed space. His 3 greatest treasures. The phrase had transformed the barrels from objects of curiosity into sacred relics, containers of a family history she was only now beginning to comprehend. "Ready?" Hamid asked, his voice a low rumble that seemed to be absorbed by the earthen walls. Layla gave a tight nod, her eyes fixed on the crescent moon symbol. The simple carving now felt like a lock, and they were about to turn the key. Hamid pressed down. The old wood groaned in protest, a long, mournful sound that reverberated through the stones. He adjusted his grip and applied more pressure. A sharp crack split the silence, and a section of the lid splintered, releasing a puff of stale air. The scent that escaped was not of wine or grain, but of something else entirely. The dry, papery aroma of old books and dried herbs, a scent of preservation. Working together, they pried the rest of the lid off. It came away in jagged pieces, revealing the contents within. There was no gleam of gold, no sparkle of jewels. Instead, the barrel was carefully packed with items wrapped in oilcloth, their forms indistinct in the dim light of Hamid's flashlight. A profound sense of reverence settled over Layla. This was not a smuggler's hoard, it was a time capsule. "Let's take it upstairs," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "My mother, she needs to see this." Hamid agreed without hesitation. He reached into the barrel and carefully lifted the largest bundle. It was surprisingly light. They carried it up the stone steps, emerging from the dark cellar into the brightly lit, chaotic kitchen. Fatima was sitting at the table, her hands clasped so tightly they seemed fused together. Her gaze snapped towards the oilcloth-wrapped bundle, her expression a mixture of fear and desperate hope. Layla placed the bundle on the table, the modern surface a stark contrast to the aged package. Her fingers fumbled as she worked at the knots of the twine holding the oilcloth together. Finally, she peeled back the stiff, waxy fabric. Inside lay a collection of objects, nestled together as if for comfort. At the top was a thick, leather-bound journal, its cover worn smooth at the edges. Beside it, a stack of letters tied with a faded silk ribbon. And next to them, a small, velvet pouch and a single, silver-framed photograph, face down. The room fell silent, the only sound the distant hum of Casablanca traffic. Layla reached for the journal first. She ran her hand over the supple leather, feeling a direct, physical connection to the great-grandfather she had never known. Opening it, she saw pages filled with elegant, flowing Arabic script. The ink was faded, but the handwriting was firm, decisive. It was a diary. "It's his," Fatima breathed, leaning forward. "That's my grandfather's handwriting." Layla's eyes scanned the first page she had opened to. The date was from 1942. The entry wasn't about business or politics. It was about a woman. "Today, Yasmina laughed," it began. "A sound like wind chimes in the Gemma LFNA. She does not know how she shines, how she eclipses everything else in this world for me." Layla looked up, meeting her mother's confused gaze. Yasmina, the name was foreign to them both. Her great-grandmother's name was Anissa. Who was Yasmina? She continued reading aloud, her voice soft. "Her family would never approve. My family would never understand. We are worlds apart, she a scholar's daughter from Fes, I a trader from Casablanca. But in the small garden behind the Medersa, none of that matters. There, we are only Omar and Yasmina." Fatima sank back into her chair, a hand flying to her mouth. The stern, imposing patriarch of her memories, the man who spoke only of duty and legacy, was a romantic. It was an image so contrary to everything she'd been taught that her mind struggled to accept it. Next, Layla picked up the stack of letters. She gently untied the fragile ribbon. These were not written in Omar's hand. The script was more delicate, yet just as passionate. They were from Yasmina. Layla read a small passage from one. "My Omar, the city feels empty without you. I walk past the tannery, and I pretend the scent is of the leather goods from your stall. I hear a merchant call out, and I turn, hoping to see your face. My father speaks of a suitable match for me, a man of letters and quiet faith. How can I tell him my heart is already in Casablanca, with a man whose faith is in the horizon, whose spirit is as wide as the sea?" A single tear traced a path down Fatima's cheek. This wasn't just a secret. It was an entire hidden life. A life of forbidden love, of stolen moments and profound connection that had been deliberately erased from the family narrative. Finally, Layla turned her attention to the last two items. She picked up the velvet pouch. It was soft, the fabric worn thin. Pulling the drawstring, she tipped the contents into her palm. It was a simple silver locket, shaped like a crescent moon. She pressed the tiny clasp, and it sprang open. Inside, there was no picture. Instead, two tiny, dried jasmine flowers were pressed under the glass, their scent long gone but their form perfectly preserved. Her hand shaking, Layla reached for the framed photograph. She turned it over. The black and white image was faded but clear. A young, handsome Omar, not in the stiff, formal portraits that hung in the family home, but relaxed, smiling, a genuine joy radiating from him. His arm was around a young woman, with intelligent, laughing eyes and a confident smile. She was beautiful, and she was not Anissa. She was Yasmina. Fatima stared at the photograph, her expression unreadable. She traced the image of her grandfather's face with a trembling finger. "All these years," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "He was presented to us as a pillar of tradition, a man who did everything for family, but this was for him. Only for him." The reason for the hidden cellar was suddenly crystal clear. It wasn't to hide wealth from the world, but to protect a memory from his own family, from the life he was obligated to lead. These weren't his greatest treasures because of their monetary value. They were treasures because they represented the greatest love of his life, a part of himself he could never share. Uncovering the truth about the room had solved one mystery, but it had given birth to another, far more personal one. Who was Yasmina, and what became of their love? The story was far from over. The air in the cellar felt heavy with unspoken words, thick with the scent of aged cedar and the ghost of a love story half told. Fatima clutched the locket, its cool metal a tangible link to a grandfather she was only now beginning to understand. Hamid, standing back respectfully, broke the silence. "There are two more," he stated simply, his gaze shifting to the remaining barrels. Layla nodded, her resolve hardening. The mystery wasn't complete. She looked at the second barrel, standing beside the one that had held Omar's secret heart. "Let's see the rest of the story," she whispered. With a shared, solemn glance, Hamid picked up the crowbar once more. The sound of the lid groaning open echoed loudly in the small chamber. This time, a different fragrance wafted out, not the masculine scent of tobacco and leather, but the faint, sweet perfume of jasmine and dried lavender. Inside, resting on a bed of the fragrant purple flowers, were a woman's treasures. Layla's breath caught in her throat. There was a small, leather-bound journal, its pages held shut by a faded silk ribbon. Beside it lay a bundle of letters, tied with a matching ribbon, their envelopes addressed to my Omar in a graceful, flowing script. At the bottom of the barrel, nestled in the lavender, was a small, intricately carved wooden nightingale and a single pressed gardenia, its petals now a fragile, paper-thin brown. With trembling hands, Layla lifted the journal. It was Yasmina's. Fatima moved closer, peering over her daughter's shoulder as Layla carefully untied the ribbon and opened it to a random page. Yasmina's words flowed across the paper, full of life and hope. She wrote of meeting a man with serious eyes and a poet's soul, of stolen moments in the bustling alleys of the Habas Quarter, of sharing mint tea under the shade of a fig tree while dreaming of a future that felt both inevitable and impossible. Fatima picked up one of the letters, her eyes scanning the delicate handwriting. "She describes his kindness," Fatima said, her voice thick with emotion. "She writes that he bought a new coat for her younger brother when he saw the boy shivering one morning. She wasn't just a flight of fancy. She loved him, and he loved her." The image of Omar, the stern patriarch, softened and reformed in their minds. He was a man capable of profound tenderness, a man who had loved two women in entirely different ways, one with duty and respect, the other with a forbidden, all-consuming passion. But the journals and letters ended abruptly, a story without a final chapter. The joy in Yasmina's writing slowly gave way to a threat of anxiety, a fear of being discovered, a love story buckling under the weight of unspoken rules. The ultimate question remained, hanging in the silent air of the cellar. Why did it end? All eyes turned to the third and final barrel. It seemed to exude a different energy, one of finality, of resolution. It felt heavier, as if containing the weight of a final, difficult truth. Hamid moved to it without a word, prying the lid off with a quiet, final creak. Inside, there were no sentimental objects. There was only a thick, manila envelope, sealed with a glob of dark red wax bearing the familiar crescent moon stamp, and beneath it, a stack of official-looking documents, folded and tied with twine. A palpable tension filled the room. This was the answer. Layla took the envelope. Her hands were unsteady as she broke the wax seal. The paper inside was crisp, preserved perfectly in the dry air. It was a letter, several pages long, written in Omar's strong, clear script. It was unaddressed. "To whoever finds this," Layla read aloud, her voice wavering slightly. "If you are reading this, then I am long gone, and the secrets of this room have been brought into the light. I do not ask for forgiveness, only for understanding." He went on to explain everything. His marriage to Anissa, Fatima's grandmother, had been arranged by their father's years before he ever met Yasmina. It was a binding contract, a merger of two prominent families and their businesses. To break it would have meant financial ruin and public disgrace for everyone involved. His father had made it brutally clear that if he refused, he would not only be disowned, but that he would personally see to it that Yasmina's family was ostracized, their reputation destroyed, labeling her a homewrecker and her family social climbers. "I was trapped," Layla continued reading, Omar's anguish bleeding through the ink. "My choice was not between two women, but between love and ruin. To choose Yasmina would have been to condemn her to a life of shame and poverty. And so, I made the only choice a man who truly loves a woman can make. I chose to protect her. I let her go." He described building the cellar late at night, brick by brick, a secret shrine to a love he had to bury. "I will be a good and faithful husband to Anissa," the letter concluded. "She is a good woman and does not deserve to be punished for the circumstances of our union. But my heart, its truest part, I leave here in this room. My three greatest treasures, the memory of our love, the soul of the woman I loved, and the terrible truth of why I had to leave her. My love for Yasmina was my greatest treasure, and my inability to claim it was my life's greatest sorrow." Silence fell, broken only by a soft sob from Fatima. She was weeping not for her grandmother's betrayal, but for her grandfather's silent, lifelong sacrifice. The documents beneath the letter confirmed his final act of love. The deed to a small bookshop in the quiet mountain town of Ifrain, purchased outright in Yasmina's name. He hadn't just abandoned her. He had given her a new life, a peaceful and respectable one, far from the judging eyes of Casablanca. Layla wrapped an arm around her mother's shoulders, holding her tight. The chill she'd felt as a child was not a ghost. It was the echo of a profound heartbreak, sealed behind a wall of stone and silence. Later that evening, upstairs, the rain had finally stopped. A weak ray of evening sun broke through the clouds, lighting up the dust motes dancing in the air of the living room. Fatima sat on the sofa, turning the locket over and over in her palm. It was no longer a symbol of infidelity, but of a tragic, impossible love. The family history hadn't been broken. It had been deepened, imbued with a painful, beautiful humanity. Layla looked at the architectural plans spread across the coffee table. "The basement," Fatima said, her voice soft but certain. "It should be sealed, but respectfully. It's his place. Theirs." Layla nodded, a new vision forming in her mind. She would design a new wall, seamless and strong, but she would leave the cellar untouched, a time capsule of sorrow and love, forever part of the home's foundation. The house no longer felt cold. It felt complete, its story finally told. Its deepest secret transformed into a quiet, profound peace.